Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time. This is Masechet Avodah Zarah, and today we are going to be learning our 8th class together of this Masechet. And today we are going to be reviewing Daf 50 through 56. Even though today's Daf is 57, we'll save it for next week. Okay, we're going to begin with the Mishnah actually on Daf 49 at the bottom. We're going to learn about the pagan god Marcolis. Marcolis was an idol that was made up of piles of stones, and it was worshipped by throwing stones at it. So the Mishnah explains that if you find three stones next to the Marcolis idol, so those stones are going to be forbidden to have any benefit from. But if you find two stones, then it's okay. Or maybe what we're talking about, again, as we said, the idol was a pile of stones, and it was worshipped by throwing stones. So when we see stones, we don't know, is it the idol or is it the thing that was used to worship it? So again, if the stones seem to be part of the idol, then they are forbidden from use. But if not, then they are permitted. So the Gemara explains that maybe these stones that you see on the ground fell off of the actual idol. And then it doesn't matter how many stones there are, 1, 2, 3, it doesn't matter. Right, so again, if you know that it fell off of the idol itself, so then everyone agrees that they are forbidden, because again, it's just a pile of stones, and it's normal for stones to fall off. The machloket is you don't know, right? You're walking down and you see this pile of stones. So at the top of Daf 50, it says that if all the stones are close together, we assume that they're forbidden from use. But if they're far away from Marcolis, from the idol, so then if it's within 4 amot, we assume that it was used for worship, and therefore they are forbidden. Or maybe they are like mini Marcolis, like little idols next to the large one, and therefore if there are 3 of them, like a pile, then it's forbidden. But if there are 2, so then it is okay. So again, and another opinion is that you don't make mini Marcolis, but like maybe they fell off, and then it doesn't matter if it's 1, 2, or 3, all of them would be forbidden. Okay, then the Gemara says, well, right, if they're in a structure where it's, 2 that are side by side and 1 on top, so then that's the 3 that we're talking about, and that looks like, I guess that could be the idol. But if it was 3 in a row, that's not the way they would make this idol. So now the Gemara says that there were idolaters who used the stones of Marcolis to pave the roads. And it seemed that, right, again, in the pagan world, not everybody worshipped every god. So if somebody would take the stones for Marcolis and pave the roads with it, it means that they didn't believe in Marcolis. So then the rabbis didn't want to walk on the road because it was made by these idolatrous stones, but other people said it was fine because the non-Jews, right, they nullified, right, in Hebrew we call it bitul, right, they nullified these stones by using them for the road. It shows that they don't think that it has any power, and therefore you could walk on it. So now the Gemara introduces a new concept called, what's in Hebrew it's called tikrovet avodah zarah, which means an item that's used to worship an idol. So we're not talking about the idol itself. We're talking about something that's used to worship it. So these items cannot be, right? One opinion is they could not be nullified, right? And that's why the rabbis didn't want to walk on the road, because they were used for idolatry. Even though they're used in a debasing way, they can't be nullified, and therefore they didn't want to walk on the road. Or another opinion is that the only type of tikurovet avodah zarah that cannot be nullified are animals, right? Animals that were used for worship cannot be nullified, but maybe rocks could be nullified. That was another opinion for bitul, for these stones. Now, an idol that was worshipped. Okay, so that was a markulis. Now we're going to talk about a different type of idol worship. It was this god, or this idol that was worshipped by sticks. So now, either it was, let's say you shook the stick in front of it, that was the way you worshipped it. So now the Gemara says, what if you broke a stick in front of it? Is that seen as worshiping the idol? And the Gemara says, yes, you would be liable for worshiping that idol, because you used a stick, even though you didn't do the exact act. You did something that was similar enough, so you would be liable for doing idolatry. But if you threw the stick at it, that's not enough. And here the Gemara explains that how do you become liable for transgressing idolatry? Either you do whatever the regular service of that idol is, and it could be any type of act, right? We're going to see, and we've seen previously, there were some idols that, right, people defecated in front of it, and that was part of the worship. So anything that was used to worship that particular idol, if you did that action, you would be liable, even if it's a debasing act. Or if you did any action that we do in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, if you do that action to this idol, you would be liable, even if that's not the regular way that you serve that idol, right? So sacrificing an animal, right? Sprinkling blood, right? Things that we do in our temple. If you did it to another idol, if you did it to an idol, you would be liable for idolatry. Okay, so again, regular worship of that idol, or our actions, our worship that we do to God. If you do it to the idol, that would be asur, that would be forbidden. Okay, so those are the two criteria. So now we're going to go back to the Gemara. Remember, we said the regular action is shaking a stick at this idol. So what if you broke the stick or threw it? So you still have a stick, but you're not doing the exact item, that you're not doing the exact action. So the Gemara says that maybe breaking the stick is like breaking an animal's neck, which is like sacrificing an animal, and therefore that's why you would be liable. So the Gemara says maybe that's the case. Now on Daf 51, the Gemara talks about other actions, right? Let's say, so we have a machloket. If you sacrifice a locust, right, like a grasshopper, to an idol, is that considered worship? Right? So if you kill a locust, is that like you're slaughtering an animal and therefore you'd be liable? Or no, because a locust isn't like a cow, and therefore it's not the same thing. So then right? Because maybe like a locust does have a neck like an animal or it doesn't. Now, let's say again, back to our stick, right? If you broke the stick, we said you're liable and the stick becomes forbidden from use, right? Because you used it for idolatry. But if you threw the stick, we say that you worshiped it, but it does not become forbidden. And again, depending on what the worship is for that that idol. Now, right, again, we can say, well, throwing it, is that like sprinkling the blood that we do in the temple? Is it the same thing? Right? Is it the same thing? So Naomi is asking, does your intent matter? So the intent does matter, and it needs to be something that you're doing to worship this idol. The question is, what is the regular way to worship this God? Right. So let's go back. Remember the if you threw a rock at Marcolis, so then, right, the question is, are the rocks going to be forbidden? Right. So the Gemara says, actually, the rocks are going to be forbidden because it's as if you're building the idol. Remember, the idol is made up of rocks, and the worship is by throwing rocks. But the Gemara says that there's throwing the rock, but it's also increasing the idol itself. So the Gemara says, right, when you throw the stone, you're actually worshiping the stones that are already there. And every time you throw a stone, right, you're adding to the pile, but creating, right, this bigger idol, so to speak. Right, so right, maybe each stone becomes the idol and becomes the tikrovet and becomes the way that you are worshiping the idol. Right? Let's say you found a garment or a utensil by the head of this idol, by Marcolis. You can use it. It does not become forbidden, but food becomes forbidden. You cannot take the food. Why? Because food, right? We used to bring food in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash, right? But you don't bring garments as part of our worship in the Beit HaMikdash. And the Gemara says, therefore, there is that distinction. Let's say so now the Gemara is going to try to find things that are similar, but not similar to the temple, right? So let's say you sacrifice an animal to an idol, but it had a blemish, right? If you remember, in the Beit HaMikdash, you could not sacrifice an animal that has a blemish. So the Gemara says you would actually be you would not be obligated. You didn't transgress. You didn't do idolatry if you sacrifice this animal, because again, that animal could not be brought to the Beit HaMikdash. However, right, if it had a small muma, a small blemish, right? What's called in the Gemara, when the Gemara wants to mention like a very small blemish, it mentions this blemish that was in the eye. It's called dukin ba'ayin, right? These very small blemishes that were in the eye of the animal. Now, for Jews, you're not allowed to bring an animal like that to the Beit HaMikdash, but non-Jews are allowed to bring that type of animal to worship to worship Hashem. But if you did that for idolatry, right, it would have to, right, if it had a large blemish, meaning if it was missing a limb, then that would be forbidden, because the Gemara explains that non-Jews are not allowed to sacrifice animals to Hashem, to our God, if they had large blemishes, right? 3 legs, 4 ears. I don't, if they had a big blemish, right, something that was very clear, that they were not allowed to sacrifice to God. This is actually learned from Noach. It says that Noach took all the living animals, and it teaches that there. Again, Noach is not Jewish, right? So he brought animals. So all those animals, they were not allowed to be. They weren't allowed to have large blemishes. They were also not allowed to be a trefa. Trefa is an animal that's going to die in the next 12 months. And therefore, those were animals that he was not allowed to bring onto the teva, onto the ark. Okay, let's say you sacrificed an animal to Markulis. Now, again, that is not the regular way that you worship this idol, but you would still be liable because it is the way we, right, worship Hashem, right? And this is based on a verse. Okay. Next Mishnah is, we actually just mentioned it, but this is the source. If you find a garment or a utensil on Markulis, it's permitted, you're allowed to use it, but not food, right? So the Gemara explains that the verse says on them or with them. If it's for decoration of the idol, then it is forbidden. If not, so then it is permissible, right? Sometimes there were coins that were put there for decoration, and sometimes they're not, right? Also garments, again, if it's decoration, it's problematic. If it's not, then it is okay. Also, anything that's found within, the Gemara describes as like a curtain, right? The area right around the idol. If it's found within that, it's forbidden. It's seen as part of the worship. If it's outside of that, if it's decoration, it's forbidden. And if not, it's okay. So now the next Mishnah says that if the idol has a garden or a bath, you can benefit from that garden as long as you don't have to pay the priests, right? As long as they're not benefiting from that. If it belongs to others also, so then you could even benefit even if you pay. An idol of a non-Jew becomes forbidden right away as soon as he makes it, even before he worships it. But if a Jew makes an idol, so then it only becomes forbidden once it is worshipped. This is according to Rabbi Akiva, right? And here we see, and we see it throughout the Tanakh, right? Jews are unfortunately making idols. They're making idols in biblical times. They're making idols in Talmudic times. I think it's interesting just to think about, as we saw in the beginning, there was this great desire to be part of the pagan world. So here the Gemara says that there is a distinction between an idol made by a Jew and an idol made by a non-Jew. So now the Gemara explains that the verse teaches that you need to destroy an idol of a non-Jew, even if it hasn't been worshipped yet. Or again, another opinion is that an idol of a non-Jew only becomes forbidden if it was worshipped, and the Jew's idol becomes forbidden right away, right? This is the opposite of what we just said in the Mishnah, and this is according to Rabbi Ishmael, right? The opposite of what Rabbi Akiva said, right? And vessels of the idols are only forbidden till they were served, right? So to the idol, right? Till they become forbidden when they're used for serving the idol. Again, the machloket is the idol itself. Does it become forbidden right away, or does it have to be worshipped first? Okay, Daf 52. You can't ever nullify an idol that was made by a Jew. It needs to be hidden away, what's called geniza, Here it doesn't mean gniza, right? We put our holy books in gniza as a way of showing respect for these objects. Here, when we say that the idol needs gniza, it's not out of respect. It's that we want to make sure that nobody ever uses it. So we have to hide it away. And we learn it. So then we learn it from the golden calf, right? The egel hazahav that the Jews made in the desert, right? When they made the egel, they actually became liable for idolatry right away, even before it was worshipped. And then the Gemara says that there's a verse that teaches that the non-Jew can nullify his own idol, and then the Jew can use it. And we saw that previously before, right? There's a verse that says that just like the Mizbeach, the altar, can't be used if the non-Jews used it for idolatry, right? It has to be, the stones have to be put in gniza. So too, the idol of a Jew also has to be put in gniza. Let's say you fixed a utensil that was used for idolatry of a non-Jew. So it's only forbidden till it was used for that idol. If it's for a Jew, according to Rabbi Akiva, it is not forbidden till you actually use it. According to Rabbi Ishmael, right, again, we're talking about something that was fixed. Is it like the idol or is it like the original utensil? Okay, we said food that was used in the service of the idol. Can you nullify it to get rid of the impurity? Right? We discussed this a little bit, but right now we didn't really discuss it. There is the concept that something becomes forbidden through idolatry. It's forbidden for benefit, and it also becomes impure, right? Because we want to make sure that nobody touches it. So the question is, can you nullify it to get it out of its impure status of tum'ah? So utensils are okay, right? Because utensils you can just put in the mikvah, so you can get rid of the impurity. But let's say you worshipped the food. Let's say you bow down to the food itself. So when you nullify it as an idol, so then the impurity, the tum'ah, goes away. And here the Gemara brings up a man named Chonio. Chonio was the son of a very famous Kohen, Shimon HaTzadik, who was a Kohen. And after his father died, Chonio, the son, ran away from Jerusalem, and he ran to Egypt, and he actually built a temple that looked just like the Beit HaMikdash. And he had Kohanim working there, and he did it for God, but kind of misguided, because you can't just build your own Beit HaMikdash. But that's what he did. So we see it throughout Shas. There's like a debate if it's actually seen as idol worship, because he's doing Avodah, right? He's worshiping Hashem, but in the wrong place. So do we see that as idol worship or not? But here the Gemara says that the kelim, the utensils that were used in Beit Chonio, what is their status? So we know that the priests, the Kohanim, who served there, if they served in Egypt, in Beit Chonio, they were not allowed to serve in Jerusalem, right? It was as if they transgressed, right? They did idolatry. Maybe it's the same thing with the actual vessels as well, or maybe not. So the Gemara says that the vessels are forbidden to use, because we learn it from the vessels of Achaz, who was the king. He had these vessels for idolatry, and they were put away, they were hidden away because they were forbidden. Okay, And since we're talking about hiding these things away, so in the northeast chamber in the Beit HaMikdash, the Hashmonaim put the stones of the Mizbeach that were defiled. Remember, we talked about when the Greeks came in, they actually did idolatry, idol worship in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. So when the Jews came in to clean it all up, they actually took those stones and hid them away and built a new Mizbeach. So the question is, again, this was like a desecration on a biblical level, and maybe that's why they did it. Or, if it's only on a rabbinic level, maybe those stones would be okay. So the Gemara says that you can't break those stones and use them because, excuse me, as you remember, you're not allowed to break the stones that are used in the Beit HaMikdash. They have to be whole stones, and therefore they just had to be hidden away. Okay. Okay. Since we were talking about things that were used by the Greeks and then the Jews came in, so they had originally wanted to forbid certain coins that were used in Jerusalem from the temple because they had sanctity, they had kedusha. So they wanted to say you can't use those coins. And then the Gemara says no. The Greeks, when the Greeks came in, they actually nullified all of these coins when they took over, and because it wasn't used in the temple, that's why you could use those coins. But for the Mizbeach, for the altar, because they used it for actual sacrifices, that needed to be put away. Okay, the next Mishnah at the bottom of Daf 52. We learned that a non-Jew can nullify, can mevatel his own idol or the idol of his friend, but a Jew cannot nullify his own idol or even a non-Jew's idol, meaning a Jew cannot nullify someone else's idol. And the things that were used in the worship of these idols can also be nullified if it's for a non-Jew. But if you nullify the actual vessels, the kelim, they are permitted, but the idol itself is not, meaning you have to actually nullify the idol itself as well. So the Gemara explains that if a Jew and a non-Jew were partners in an idol, if the non-Jew nullifies his own part, so then the Jew's part is also nullified because they were partners. Later on, Rebbe actually realized, Rebbe said, why does that work? Because the Jew is only really worshiping the idol because the non-Jew is doing it. And then later, Rebbe actually realized that no, Jews were actually doing idolatry because they wanted to do it. And then he said that therefore the Jew's part is not nullified when the non-Jew nullifies his idol. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 53. What is the actual nullification process? So what the non-Jew needs to cut off a little piece of the idol. So you can cut off the tip of the ear or the tip of the nose or the tip of the finger or somehow disfigure the idol, and then it becomes nullified. It becomes permitted. If he spits at it or urinates in front of it or drags it around, that's not enough of a bitul, of a nullification. He has to actually do an act. There's a machluket if he sells it. It does that nullify the idol? Some say that it does, and some say that it doesn't. So now the Gemara says, right, if he just like spits at it or something like that, it could be like momentary anger, and that passes. So that's why it doesn't nullify the idol. Okay, so now we said, what's the machloket about selling the idol? So the Gemara says it depends who you sell it to, right? If you sell the idol to someone who's going to who melts down metals, right? So like a blacksmith or someone who smelts metal. So if you're not sure if he's going to melt it down, so then that's not bitul. But if you know that he is, so then it is a bitul. It is seen as a nullification. Again, if he knows he's going to do it, then he will. So if it's a Jewish smelter, so then we assume he's going to nullify it or melt it down. But if you sell it to somebody else, right, he might just keep it for himself. So it's not so clear. Right, if you buy scrap metal from a non-Jew and you find an idol in part of the scrap metal, you should give it back if you didn't pay for it yet. And if you did pay, so then you have to take that idol and throw it into the Dead Sea, into Yam HaMelach, right? Because we don't know if the non-Jew nullified that idol, and if he didn't, you cannot get any benefit from it. If the non-Jew left his idol and he intends to come back for it, so it's not mivutal, it's not nullified. If, let's say, the stones, let's say a pile of stones fall on it, that's also not enough of a nullification, because the guy could say, oh, I know it's there, it's under there, I can always go get it later, right? If a robber comes and steals it, it's also not necessarily nullified, because maybe he thinks, oh, the robbers are going to, they'll worship it. Leah asks about the Dead Sea specifically. Generally, it is the Dead Sea specifically because the idea is that because of all the sulfur, it will like destroy the metal. It'll destroy whatever's thrown into it. And therefore, when it says Yam HaMelach, it literally means Yam HaMelach. Great question. Okay. So the Gemara says that if they're going to come back, like in the war of Joshua, of Yoshua, so the Gemara says, what are we talking about? So the Amoraim, the Amorites who fought the Emori, that nation, when they fought Yehoshua, they ran away, but they intended to come back, right? They were just scared and they thought like, oh, we'll be back. So therefore, all the idols that they left were not nullified because they really thought that they were going to come back. So here the Gemara says at the bottom of Daf 53 that the Jewish people were promised the land of Israel. Therefore, all the trees in Israel were considered the Jews' trees. And therefore, if a non-Jew bows down to it, how could we call that making it into an idol? It's not theirs, it's actually the Jews, right? And we know that a non-Jew, well, we're going to learn it in a minute, a non-Jew cannot make something that isn't his forbidden. So the Gemara says, rather, when the Jews made the golden calf, the Egel HaZahav, in the desert, so they actually showed the world and God that they like idolatry. And therefore, when the non-Jew bows down to trees in Israel, so then we see that really the Jews don't mind, and therefore that's how it becomes an idol. It becomes Avodah Zarah, even though the non-Jew bowed down to it. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 53. An idol that was abandoned, as we said, by a non-Jew is that seen as nullification or not? So if it's during peacetime, then it is. But if it's during war, then it is not. And then the Gemara mentions these pedestals called a bimus. Bimus was the pedestal that they put either idols on it or statues on it. So if it was for a statue of the king, so then those pedestals are permitted. Again, if it was used for an idol, then it would be forbidden. The Gemara says that you can't even sit on these pedestals, even if they're broken, because again, they were used for idolatry, or if they were broken, then you can sit on it because it's seen as it was nullified, right? But an altar that was broken is not seen as nullified and therefore is forbidden for use, right? Again, a bimus, this pedestal was one stone as opposed to an altar, which is made up of a lot of stone. If most of the stones are broken in the altar, then it is permissible for use. Okay, daf 54. If an animal was worshipped, now again, animals could be worshipped as a god or sacrificed to a god, right? So those are going to be a distinction, right? So if an animal was worshipped, if it's his own animal, so then that animal could never be a sacrifice in the Beit HaMikdash. If it's somebody else's animal, then it can. If a non-Jew forced a Jew to bow down to his own animal, it becomes forbidden to be used as a sacrifice in the Beit HaMikdash, right? This is called ones, which means against your will, like you did something. In general, you're not liable for these things. So here you wouldn't be liable because you did it, but it does have an effect on the animal itself. So now the Gemara talks about, right, being forced to do idolatry, right? We know that the Torah says, right, there are certain meat, right? We have to keep the mitzvot, but it also uses the words v'chai bahem, right? The Torah tells us we have to live to do the mitzvot. Therefore, it's better sometimes to not do a mitzvah or to transgress in order to save your life, but you're not allowed to desecrate the name of God, right? This is called chilul Hashem, right? You're not allowed to do a chilul Hashem. Therefore, certain times you need to give up your life and not do certain mitzvot, right? And this is the idea of idolatry. If someone says, I'm going to kill you if you don't bow down to the idol. So now the Gemara says, right, some people think that that means anytime. The Gemara says no. If it's in public, then yes, you need to sanctify God. You have to do what's called a kiddush Hashem and give up your life and not do idolatry. However, if it's in private, so then you are allowed to bow down to God, to bow down to the idol, and you do not have to give up your life because it is in the privacy of your own house. When there was religious persecution, right, of the Romans, so the pedestals keep their forbidden status, right? Because again, in that time, they forced people to do idolatry. And the Gemara says either it's because they forced them, or in a time of persecution, there are people who will do it willingly, and therefore those things do become forbidden. Let's say you poured wine on the animal's horns. So now again, the question is, are you doing it in service of another idol, or are you actually worshiping this animal? right? So if it's for another idol, so then the animal is permitted. But or maybe once you do that, therefore it is forbidden, right? And you need this action of pouring something on the on the animal. Okay, right. So here the Gemara talks about actually doing an action, right? So again, remember we talked about if a person bows down to a mountain, right, to the mountain god or to earth, right? So it doesn't make the mountain forbidden. However, if you do an action, if you dig a pit or a ditch and then you bow down to it, it does become forbidden because you changed the dirt, the ground. Okay. If you trade something for an idol, right? This is called chalipin. Chalipin means like lahchlif. You trade. If you, right, a person gave an idol and the other person gave him an animal, that animal becomes forbidden because you use the animal to acquire the idol. Now, if you keep exchanging it for something else, it maintains its forbidden status. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 54. They asked the elders of Rome so now we're going to get into more philosophical conversations about idolatry, right? So they said, if God doesn't want idolatry, why doesn't he just get rid of all of these idols? So they answered, well, right, people are bowing down to the sun and the moon and the stars. You want God to get rid of the sun and the moon and the stars, right? God is not going to destroy the world because people are silly and bow down to these things. So, right, God doesn't right, he doesn't destroy those things because people are bowing down to them. So now the Gemara explains, right, Hashem doesn't want to destroy the world because of foolish people. And then there are a few stories of, right, really, like, let's say if a person steals grain and plants it, really God shouldn't let that grain grow, right? Because he should, like, I don't want to say, like, punish the person. And the Gemara says God doesn't do that. God doesn't change the rules of nature in order to punish silly people who do silly things, right? And basically the Gemara is saying that God will punish people in the right time, in the right place, and it doesn't have to be immediate, right? They asked Rabban Gamliel, why is God so jealous of people who worship idolatry, but he's not jealous of the actual idols? So he answers, right? God is upset at the people who have de'ah, right? They have intellectual capacity and they choose to do silly things, so God gets upset. Why should he be mad at the idol? The idol didn't do anything, right? The mountain didn't do anything. The tree didn't do anything. God doesn't need to destroy the tree. The tree was just sitting there. It's the people that need to be punished, right? So once they said, oh, our idol, our God is so powerful, right? Everything around the temple was destroyed, but our temple of our God, right? Again, this idol wasn't destroyed. So it shows that our temple is so powerful. And the Gemara says, no, what are you talking about? God punishes the people, as we said, punishes the people. He doesn't punish the idol. He doesn't care about the idol. Okay, Daf 55, right? The general Agrippa asked Rabban Gamliel, again, right? God is a jealous God. Right, really, Kel Kana means that he is a vengeful God, not a jealous God. But they say, right, who is he jealous of? Right, he's not jealous. Right, maybe they thought like if he's jealous of these idols, it means that they're important. And the Gemara says, no, we are jealous of things that are lesser because people are worshiping them, and Hashem wants everyone to worship him, right? And the Jews say to Rabbi Akiva, right? Again, wait a minute, but we see that these idols heal people. So Rabbi Akiva said, no, right? God gives people suffering, and that suffering is scheduled to leave at a certain time. Now, if in the meantime they go to an idol and they do hocus pocus and the person gets better, don't think that it's from the hocus pocus of the idol worshiper. It's because God determined that that was the exact time that this illness needed to leave. Right. The same thing. There was a story with there was no rain, and then they did all this hocus pocus idolatry, and the rain came. The Gemara says, "Be careful. God wanted it to rain. It had nothing to do with the idol." And then there's a very famous line at the, on Daf 55, which is, right, if you want to make yourself impure, if you want to do bad things, God lets you do it, right? It says God makes an opening, right? He lets you do it. And if you want to make yourself tahor, God helps you, right? And this is a line that's usually used in the tshuva process, right? We're getting closer to Elul and to Rosh Hashanah, right? When we want to do tshuva, when we want to get closer to God, right? We say that if you take the first step, if you want to get close, then God will help you do that. Okay. The next Mishnah is going to start a new topic. So we're going to do it today, and then we're going to continue next week. The topic is the concept of yain nesech. Yain nesech literally means wine that was used in libation. Nesech means to be poured, generally on an altar or for a god. We saw this previously, that wine from a non-Jew is forbidden because we assume that the non-Jew poured a little bit off for his idol worship. So the question is, when does wine of a non-Jew become forbidden? Can a Jew help a non-Jew make wine? Okay, those are the topics that we're going to get to. Also, it's important to understand how wine was made, right? So the Hebrew word for a wine press is a gat. A gat is a wine press. They have them actually all over my area where Zohar and I live. There are, right, a wine press in the ancient times was basically bedrock or stones, a huge stone that had like a depression in it. So it had an upper part where the grapes were placed and crushed. And then it had like a pipe that connected it to a lower area where the wine, right, basically grape juice, flowed into. And they used to first crush the grapes on that ramp, then they would put it on the top, and then it would flow down to the bottom. Okay, so now here is the Mishnah. You are allowed to buy grape juice and grapes from a non-Jew from the upper press, right? Even though the non-Jew crushed the grapes, because it's not seen as wine up on top. But whatever is in the lower part, again, it's not wine either, it's also grape juice, but whatever's in the lower area is forbidden to buy from the non-Jew because that's already seen as, right, on its way to be wine. You can crush grapes with the non-Jew in the upper part of the wine press, even though the non-Jew is going to make the grape juice impure, but you can't harvest grapes with a non-Jew because when you pour it into that upper, right, you harvest the grapes and you put it into the wine press, now you're causing those pure grapes to become impure, and that is problematic. A Jew who's making wine and the Jew is impure, is tameh, you can't crush grapes with him because even on the top, because we're not allowed to help the Jew, right? We're not allowed to make wine become impure. But you are allowed to bring him barrels and take away barrels. So too with a Jewish baker who makes bread and he is impure, right? Really, you shouldn't make bread impure. So you're not allowed to knead with him or shape the dough, but you're allowed to transport the bread. Okay, so now the Gemara explains that wine, once it flows down, that's when it becomes or can become yain nesach, which is different than what we just said a minute ago. In the Mishnah, it said that only when it's at the bottom. Now we're saying even when it's flowing down, it also becomes forbidden. But as we said, you can buy wine from the upper part. So the Gemara said that originally, right, there was a machloket if you can harvest grapes with a non-Jew or not, and they changed the idea later on. Okay, last daf for today, daf 56. You are so now the Gemara says, when is it considered wine, or I guess what is the end of the grape juice process? Right, it's the wine process, but it's before fermentation. So one opinion is when the skins, right, like float to the top, then it's considered done, and then it can become yain nesach. Okay, so we see that. How did they make the wine? So they used to take a basket and they used it as a filter at the bottom of the pipe, right before it got into the lower area, and that was the filter. So as it's flowing down from the upper part to the lower part, with the basket in place, so again, the lower part is yain nesach, but the upper part is not yet. Now, if you took this basket that's basically like the strainer from the bottom and you moved it up to the top, now the upper part is also seen as yain nesach, because the contents that were in the basket now got mixed with all the contents that were in the upper part as well, and therefore it is problematic, and we will see more about that next week. Okay. I saw there was a whole conversation that I missed here in the notes. What are we talking about? Is there statute of limitations? It's a great question. There is not. I would say that once it was, I would say once it's been buried and you dig it up, I imagine it's not seen as an idol anymore, right? It's something that was forgotten. It was something that was not used, and it's probably okay, but I'm not paskening. Okay, and then there was chalipin as chalita. Yeah, that's a little bit different. Okay, great. Are there any other questions? We actually did a lot today. Yes, Aliza.
Right. May I respectfully disagree with you?
Sure. Go ahead.
I'll be careful. Whoever Yomi man is. She asked you if Kavanaugh was significant while they were manipulating the rocks and throwing the rocks. And a person who looks, like the spies and all, the person who looks at the activity does not know your Kavanaugh. It sees the action, and therefore you are influencing another human being wrongly. Now, that's so. Kavanaugh usually is important in a lot of things, praying, but of your actions, sometimes you just don't do it because somebody else might get led astray.
I think the question was, meaning, if you walk by, I think the idea, I hear what you're saying, but here the question is, when someone is throwing a rock at an idol, if he is intending, or she is intending to worship the idol, then that action is a forbidden action. But if it's someone who's just throwing rocks, it is, even though the action is the same act, the it's not seen as worship, right? That, I think that was the question, the way I understood it, meaning you have to intend to worship the idol. Now, again, if you are doing the act, which is the way you worship that idol, so then it doesn't matter, right? If you're doing that act and that is the act of worship, so then you have transgressed in terms of idolatry. The question is, if not, right, let's say you didn't, that's the question, right? When is it worship and when is it not worship? That's what the Gemara is trying to understand.
I think I want to say something for what Elisa said. Elisa, are you referring to Marit Ain, something that is by an observer, someone else thinks that you're doing A, but you're not really doing
And
A.
so therefore, do you think Moshe would have struck the rock if he knew that he wasn't going to get to go into Eretz Israel? It's because everybody else watched him. And I can give you example of that being dangerous. The spies, Shlach Lecha. Do you think all of those 10? It's because they moved other people by their actions. What we do influences others, not necessarily. But I understood what you said, and I appreciate you getting that part. But we have to be careful. Oh, I really didn't mean it.
I agree with you. I just think it's two different things, right? The Gemara is trying to understand, if I walk down the street and I see a rock, the Gemara is trying to understand, is that rock permitted because it's a rock on the side of the road? Or is it a rock that was used to worship an idol and therefore I'm not allowed to pick it up? I think that's the idea. Like, we're trying to understand, we're not talking about like watching other people do things. I think we're trying to understand, when are things called idolatry and when are things not idolatry?
Yeah,
right? We have to be very
I think
careful.
you're right when you say there's two things going on. Yeah,
correct.
I see it now.
Okay.
Is there like a difference if, like, let's say it's clear that you're doing it for like a legitimate purpose? Like, let's say you're hitting the thing with a stick, but you're trying to like kill a fly.
Oh, well, okay.
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think that, again, it goes back to when I introduced this idea of worship. If you're doing an action, like you're saying, hitting the idol, that's not something we do in the Beit HaMikdash. So because that's not something we do, we're going to look at intent, right? If you mean to worship the idol with that action, it would be forbidden. If you're trying to kill an idol, if you're trying to kill a fly, so then it would not be called idolatry.
Yeah.
But if you're doing something that we do, so, right, if you're slaughtering an animal, right, so like, let's say you say, oh, I was just slaughtering an animal because I wanted to have a barbecue, but you do it in front of an idol, that's problematic. So I think that's the issue, right? If you're doing something that looks like worship, we have to be very careful, right? If you remember, I think we did it a few weeks ago, right? The Gemara said, make sure you don't bend down and tie your shoe in front of an idol because people might think that you're bowing down to it.
That's
so
exactly,
now again,
yeah.
you're not bowing down to it, but it looks like you are. So
Exactly.
I don't think it's saying that you would be liable for worship, but it's saying, right, be careful. And I'm sure that there are things that we could extrapolate to our own lives as well, right? Be careful with the things that we do because, like you said, you might intend one thing, but it could look like something else, which is Zohar mentioned Marit Ayin, right? So I think, we have to be sensitive to those things.
And we'd be especially careful with the bowing because it is something that we would do ourselves in our own temple. So that we can really be cautious of and really careful. And for other things we don't ever do, we wouldn't even know that others would throw stones in order to worship. We don't even know about that. And you know, so again, you know, that might absolve you, but it is another caution to go ahead and seek education so that you can be safe in all this complex environment in which we find ourselves.
And how come this is the first time I'm hearing that non-Jews get to worship in Beit HaMikdash and have sacrifices? I must have missed something.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that more when we get to Masechet Zvachim. But they did accept sacrifices, animals from non-Jews. Again, depending on the time of year, depending on the type of animal, but non-Jews were allowed to sacrifice, to bring sacrifices.
From the day one?
Yeah, we'll learn more about it when we get to Zvachim.
These were just a certain type of special gift offering. It wasn't all the other types. It was just one type.
Thank you.
And also when they talk about Mashiach time, then they're also going to bring from all the nations. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Exactly, Naomi.
Thank you.
Would someone just want to say something?
I never know.
Oh, just it's in the tefillah. Ki beiti beit tefillah yikareh lekol ha'amim. You know, unless you don't know Hebrew, but
yeah,
it's right there.
Not at your level.
Yeah, there's a verse that says that our temple is going to be a house of worship for all of the nations.
I know that. Going to be his future, but
correct.
Saying it's
correct. Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you. Thank you.